Welcome to Meeting of the Minds. My name is Christopher Maute. I'll be your host. This is a discussion interview show where we talk about the hot topic or hot button discussion topics in the atheist theism debate landscape, and we talk about it in a civil and respectful manner. I'm very happy to have as my guest this week Gary. Now, I need to preface this week's interview just with a little bit of information. Now, when I first presented the idea of this show being an interview show to Dr. Jones, he gave me the go-ahead, so I immediately started sourcing for guests to be on the show. And one of the ways that I did so was to put a little snippet on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, asking people if they were interested in being interviewed, if they were interested in specific questions that I posed on my YouTube video. And one of the first people that responded that was super interesting is the gentleman that I'm going to be talking to today, and his name's Gary. So, Gary, how you doing today?
I'm great, cheers. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing really well. I'm looking forward to having a really nice discussion today. Thank you very much for taking the time to have this discussion with me. So if you don't mind, let's get right to the introductory questions. So these are the questions that I always give my guests these questions ahead of time because I want them to be able to answer them as thoroughly as possible and give me a really nice full explanation to them. So, Gary, as best as you can, how would you identify yourself and how would you describe your worldview?
At this current time, I'm a Universalist Christian.
Okay. And so explain that, how would you explain that to people if somebody were to follow it up and say, so that's the label, what does that mean?
It means that I believe that everybody is saved, but I do believe that Jesus Christ's message does get you to be a better human being.
Okay. So to follow up with that, I'm interested to know how you interpret the Bible. Do you interpret it using an orthodox or a non-orthodox understanding, which, and I will just clarify that, by orthodox, I would interpret that as meaning the revealed word of God, whereas non-orthodox would allow for some interpretation or understanding by the people who wrote it.
I would say non-orthodox by that definition.
Non-orthodox. Okay. So as your beliefs relate to science, I have a couple of questions. So how old do you believe the Earth and the universe are?
The Earth, I think, is around about, it's a couple of billion years old, and the universe is about 14.5.
Excellent. And what is your opinion of the biological theory of evolution?
I accept it. It's been proven over and over, so I don't see why denying it.
Okay.
It's such a good thing.
Okay. So based on the answers that you gave, you see no reason why your faith has a direct conflict with the conclusions of science. You accept the around 4.55 billion year old Earth age and the around 13 to 14 billion year old universe age. You accept the theory of evolution, and your faith doesn't come into conflict with the conclusions of science in those regards.
No, not at all.
Okay. So my next question is, what led you to your beliefs?
Investigation, looking into science, looking into theology, looking into bits and pieces, just coming to my own conclusion what about the universe it was.
Okay. And at any point in time during your exploration or investigation, were you ever an atheist?
I was an atheist before I started.
You're an atheist before you started. Could you go a little bit more into your history? Did you start as a theist, become an atheist, and then re-embrace theism? Or did you start as an atheist and then do your investigation and then later on embrace theism? Could you explain that a little bit?
I was a member of the Church of England, baptised in that faith. Came to be a agnostic leading towards atheism when I was around 12, 13. We found my faith around about 2021. Well, my deistic faith, should we say. I found my Christianity when I was about 23, 24.
Okay. And at 23, 24, you came to the understanding and belief that you have now, which is more of a universalist Christianity, which has a non-orthodox understanding of the Bible, which does not interfere with contemporary understandings of science and the conclusions thereof.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you very much for clarifying that. I think it's going to really feed into people's understanding of the discussion that we have for the rest of the show. And the discussion that we have is going to kind of pivot off of what you just said. The very fact that you are a universalist Christian denotes the fact that there are many different kinds of Christians, of the people that consider themselves Christians, of the people that consider themselves theists. There are many different kinds. There's a lot of diversity in the field, and I would also say that in the atheist world there is just as much diversity. But one of the things that we're going to address today is, of the different kinds of atheists that exist, there exist the militant atheists, and I know that you have a couple of opinions about that, and I was curious to explore a little bit about how you got to know the new atheists, what your opinions are of them now. Was there ever a time when you embraced what they were saying, and anything to that effect?
Okay. Okay, I'll start. The first time I came across what we consider the new atheists is that Richard Dawkins, in my country at least, they do a bit of console programming towards the Christmas stuff. Like, they do all the Christmas stuff, and then they'll do on like BBC One or BBC Two. Well, they used to do, which was these Christmas scientific lectures. And the first time I came across Richard Dawkins was on one of these, where he was with the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Douglas Adams. Was that Douglas Adams?
Yeah, Douglas Adams. Yeah, He was on that with that, and he also did some other like stuff about like the strata of the Earth and stuff like that. Again, it's not stuff I was really into, and I'm still not. But again, I watched it because my family were watching it, so that's how I came to know him. So again, I wasn't aware that there's this thing called the New Atheist Movement until like 9/11 happened, and then I came across people like Dawkins. I thought, oh, I recognise him because he'd done these lectures, and then I bought his book, and then that's how I became aware of the actual movement.
Which book did you buy? The God Delusion?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's how you got acquainted with the whole new atheist movement. So you said that you embraced your existing belief system when you were around 22, 23, 24. So around how old were you when 9/11 happened?
Oh, 2001, so it would have been 19.
Okay. So this is before you... This is while you were still an atheist? I'm just trying to put things in context.
Yes, I was, yeah.
Okay. And so... was there a time in your atheism when you were reading Dawkins, because you said that you had bought his book, the God Delusion? Was there a time when you really embraced the things that he was saying? And I only ask because there was a time when of course, when I bought Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, and I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was great. It was, he was preaching to the choir to me, to the point where I outlined the book. I thought it was that good. I'm embarrassed to admit that now because I think he's a much better scientist than he is a philosopher, but that's my take on it. I'm curious to know what your take is.
I hadn't really read the book, but again, I remember... Again, it was more after that I read the book. It was more after I'd seen people on YouTube like doing like your Christian books, and I thought the best way to counteract that was with reading a book that is on the other side, because that's more intellectually honest.
Okay.
But again, if you want to know my opinions on 9/11 were, I don't think it's a Muslim thing. I think it was a social-political thing, and I thought that at the time, and I think that now.
Okay.
I think it's very simplistic to say, oh, it was caused by them believing in Allah or believing in Muhammad or whatever. I think it's much more that it was the environment they were in was like very very poor, very, very, poverty stricken, and when you're in that sort of environment, you always want a scapegoat. It's
Hmm.
basically what happened in Nazi Germany. They want a scapegoat. They want somebody to blame for their for their current you know way they were. So basically, Osama bin Laden gave them the US, which had been like in this area had basically backed their civil war with the Russians and stuff like that. I think that's more where the problem comes from.
And that's a good point because even though people reduce the problem to religion, in America at least, I don't know how it looked from over the pond, but in America, it fueled a very vitriolic, I'll use as an adjective, a very vitriolic new atheist movement that had the four horsemen, of which Dawkins was one, Hitchens was another, Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, and in my opinion, it gave a lot of people, while it might have had a good effect in bringing atheists out of the closet, which I think is one of the goals. I think it kind of had a detrimental effect in that the atheists that chose to come out of the closet did so in such a strident fashion that it prevented a good dialogue about the very thing that atheists and theists should be talking about. Do you find any of that? I mean, are you the kind of person that goes onto discussion forums and chat rooms and stuff like that about this topic?
Um, Not really, because again, it's hard to find somebody who's reasonable, who's willing to discuss this as a reasonable human being without getting into you believe in a magical sky daddy, or you believe in nothing, or you're going to hell, or anything like that, without getting into that sort of argument.
Hmm.
It's much more about the rhetoric you can spout and not the arguments you can present, which is something that I don't really like.
I agree. And to an extent, I think the new atheist movement kind of fed into the rhetorical side of the discussion instead of the substantive side of the discussion. So I'm glad that you decided, even though you have the opinion that it's difficult to have these kinds of discussions, I'm super glad that you decided to come on the show to have this discussion with me. So one of the manifestations of the new atheist movement is a lot of different atheist organizations, at least in America. There's the Freedom from Religion Foundation, there's American Atheists, there are secular humanist think tanks like Center for Inquiry, and recently there was a atheist monument put up in Florida. And there was a little bit of a hullabaloo about that in the atheist-theist community because well, just for several reasons, not the least of which is a proponent of creationism decided to come to the unveiling, stand on the said monument, and preach. So that was a little bit of a weird dynamic. But aside from the circus that was, there was also the whole having an atheist monument on public ground next to a religious monument and all of the questions that raised. Now, I think that you were following that kind of closely, so I was curious to know from across the pond, how was that perceived?
I can see how it's perceived by me. I can't speak to other people and how they perceived it.
Fair enough.
But I thought it was a good idea because again, I understand that in America that atheists do somewhat of a mistrusted minority, and if they want their own identity and something that represents them in the US, that's fine. I have no
Mhm.
problem with that. I just have a problem when they have a problem with, let's say, for example, the whole thing with the Holocaust memorial. But again, it doesn't have I don't have a problem with that. I just think that the type of monument they've chosen is a little silly because
Mhm.
again, instead of having something that represents them, it's in something that's in reaction to something that people who believe are seeing and doing. It's like, well, why not just be your own thing? Why does it have to be a reaction to what people who are out there believing are saying or doing? Be your own people. You don't have to be in reaction to what I or any other Christian or theist is saying. Why not just be your own organization and thing.
Hmm. And I know that there were. This might get me in a little bit of trouble, but I know that there were people arguing with. So, for the people that aren't familiar with this, the monument that was put up for the atheist monument that we're discussing is actually a bench. And it's a bench made out of concrete or stone. I mean, it's quite nice looking. And on it are engraved sayings from atheists that talk about, atheists would rather build hospitals than say prayers and stuff like that. I actually don't remember the exact quotes, but I remember they're along those lines. And I remember there was a little tempest in a teapot about the fact that if an atheist is going to say that they would rather have hospitals built than have prayer said, then why aren't there more secular hospitals established in the United States? And so there was it just seemed like a bunch of atheist platitudes engraved into an ill-conceived monument that was placed there because of a perfect storm of nonsense legally that was in reaction to a Ten Commandment monument being there. At least that's the take that I had on it.
Yeah, I think it's something like that. I know it's a reaction to some sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, I understand that when you're a minority, you want something that represents you. However, I just don't understand why somebody why again, if you're going to have something that says, "Oh, what atheists would rather build hospitals than say prayers," and said, "Well, that's very funny because you're not building hospitals. You have atheists with a substantial amount of capital. Let's name them, shall we? We have Mark Zuckerberg, who is the owner of Facebook, an atheist. We have Bill Gates, who's the head CEO of Microsoft, who's an atheist. We have Joss Whedon. I could go on with people who have substantial capital. And did they choose to build hospitals? No. Did they choose to build schools? No. Did they choose to build anything that is actually any benefit to society at all? No. What they do
Bill
is
Gates, of course, has the
money
Gates Foundation, so he's doing plenty
matter.
of good things for society. But admittedly, he's not mentioned on the atheist monument, and he is not representative of what most atheists who are making a lot of money are doing. He's not a representative of that. So to your point, yes, there are many atheists that are financially well off that are not pursuing the very lofty ideals that are engraved into the atheist monument itself, which I think is kind of the point that you're driving home.
Yeah. Again, with all the money you spent on the monument, why don't you spend that on a school or a hospital?
Mm-hmm. Well, because the funny part is they would like to establish they would like to establish 50 more of these at like $6,000 a pop. So I mean, if you're gonna have that kind of money, why not put it towards the very things that you're promoting on the monuments instead of putting up those monuments? Because there's no demand for atheist monuments, in as much as there is a demand for good education and health and things like that. So I think that it's an interesting campaign, but as an atheist, even I think it's a little ill-conceived. But I'm open to hear other people's interpretation of it, so that maybe they can provide an angle that I'm not seeing it from. Because the way that I'm seeing it's just silly. Now, you had mentioned the Star of David incident where the Freedom from Religion Foundation, headed by Dan Barker, and the American Atheists, David Silverman, I believe, were trying to get the Star of David removed from the Holocaust Museum. Is that right?
Yeah, Ohio, yeah.
In Ohio. Okay. And whereas the atheist monument is what it is, you kind of took umbrage with the idea of them wanting to remove the Star of David.
Yeah, it's tied to the Holocaust. What are you going to say? Oh, well, we can't have that because it offends our feelings. Well, I'm sorry, you don't get to choose what is or what isn't the symbol of significance of a particular event. again, you can say that they shouldn't do it and give the reasons why, but the reasons I've heard so far haven't been exactly forthcoming or entirely rational.
Hmm.
Um, the reason I've heard is because it's a religious symbol. I'm sorry, it was used as a political symbol and a rolling symbol, and a symbol to mark people as different in in the Holocaust. So how can you
Hmm.
say that we can't use it now just because it offends your sensibilities?
Hmm. I think I'm with you on this one because if it's a museum and it's publicly funded and it's a museum meant to educate people on specific events or topics, and that event or topic happens to involve a religious cohort of people, I don't see what the problem is in including a symbol that represents that religious cohort because I don't see how it could be twisted to be establishing or endorsing a religion that would violate the United States Constitution. I don't see how it violates the Establishment Clause,
But
personally.
no, 'cause it doesn't, in my personal point of view. I mean, like, it's not establishing it, it's just saying that the Jews were a persecuted minority in Germany, which
Hmm.
they were. Anybody who wants to argue that fact, please feel free to do so, but you won't be doing so. It's very.
Yeah, well, I don't. Well, I don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. I don't think that they're claiming that Jews weren't the victims of the Holocaust, um, just because they want the Star of David to be removed from the museum. And I don't think that that's what you're arguing. But I just want to clarify that. But I think that there's something about it being public property and it being a religious symbol and them being atheists that it somehow raises their heckles, and me being not as adamantly anti-theist as they seem, it doesn't seem to bother me as much as it bothers them. But that's just my take on it. But their level of strident atheism kind of brings up the topic of um, atheism as a religion. So I phrase it that way tongue in cheekly, purposely to stir up conversation. So, of course, I don't believe that atheism is a religion, but I do think that there are people who embrace the label of atheism as a freak flag that they would like to wave high and that they would like to push in other people's face to the point of almost proselytizing. So, in that sense, it almost seems like a belief system that they want to get other people on board with. And I think that that is none more clear than on the chat in the chat rooms, on the forums, and especially on YouTube channels. So, are you familiar with some of the players in the atheism theism world on YouTube world?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
More than
Do you
familiar.
do you have any favorites?
But in a positive sense or a negative sense, because I could give
Both.
you.
Who do you love to love and who do you love to hate?
Love to love is like people like No Plum. On the atheist side, it's No Plum, Richard Coughlin,
No, Plum's good.
um,
Yeah. What was the second one?
Richard Coughlin, Richard the Dick
Okay.
Coughlin.
Okay.
Trying to think, Catholius. I think on the atheist side, it really does. Who I like talking to, Richard's Gate, Shah, Rob Beans, people like that. They're the positives.
Hmm. And what
So you
about
talk to
positives on the theist side?
Rational Roundtable, um, Gablo, UDF Wildcard. Um, Together to Peace was really good for me. Lebanon 312.
Okay. So let's talk about the people you love to hate. Let's start with the atheist side. So who are the YouTube channelers that you avoid or that you watch just to raise your own blood pressure?
Thunderfoot, Pat Cundell, uh, Boy Dance, Aaron Ra. Well, Aaron Ra I respect as a scientist, but when it comes to theology, he's really unknowledgeable. Um, those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. Boy Dance.
Okay, so I do have Bionic Dance as a guest in a couple of weeks. So just out of curiosity, if and this is kind of, and I didn't prepare you for this, but if you could ask her any question through me, what question would that be?
Uh, since she doesn't like people determining what she believes, how can she sit there and determine what other people should believe?
Okay. All right, I'll be sure to ask her that. Now, I'm familiar with Bionic Dance, and so Bionic and Thunderfoot, and I think that you mentioned Aaron Ra as well.
Well, Amraz, but I respect him as a scientist, but when it comes to theology, he tends to distort the truth. I
Gotcha.
don't want to say lie,
Okay.
but he tends to not understand what he's reading.
Okay. Okay. So for those of you that are not familiar with the YouTube world, he listed off a lot of the really popular people in the atheist YouTube world. So Thunderfoot, Aaron Ra, Bionic Dance, they seem to be people that have lots of subscribers. People watch their A lot of people watch the videos that they post, and they have a voice. They have a very definite voice and a following in the YouTube world. So, what is it about the people like Thunderfoot and when Aaron Ra talks about theology versus science and the bionic dances of the world? What is it about them that you love to hate?
Okay, with Thunderfoot, it's he knows what he's talking about when it comes to science. He's very knowledgeable about that, and this is going to be like for this is both Aaron Ra and Thunderfoot here.
Go ahead.
But when it comes to theology or politics, they seem to be unknowledgeable. In the fact that they'll make claims about, like for example, the 9/11 monument or the mosque, or when it comes to certain parts of the Bible, they seem whenever they talk about that, they seem to be vastly unknowledgeable on what they're talking about. Now,
Hmm.
there's no better explanation of this than when Aaron Ra quotes dear church fathers or quotes anybody of theology whatsoever. And I referred to his quoting Justin Martyr, I referred to him quoting Martin Luther. He'll quote them and quote them out of context.
Okay.
And again, and this is not an atheist theist thing. This is the simple getting somebody's quote right, because otherwise you are straw manning their position.
Sure.
Okay,
Nobody wants to be
it's like me taking something
nobody
you
wants to be
said
accused of
and taking
quote
the
mining or
context.
setting up a straw man, right?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
that's what my problem with them. Pat Cundell, he's just a he's somebody who I wouldn't say he's a racist, but I think he's very bigoted when it comes to Muslims. I mean, he supports a lot of groups that nobody with half the brain would go anywhere near. Like he supports the EDL.
Hmm.
Now, if you don't know who the EDL are, which you probably don't because you're from America, but it, the EDL are a far right pseudo fascist group who believe that Muslims are, trying to influence our society and try and enforce laws and all this sort of stuff. Now, Muslims in my country make up about not even about 10%, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. Now, now again, there's no way that they can enforce policies that these people think they can.
Hmm.
And most of the Muslims who they do go against are peace loving people who don't want any trouble. So
Fair enough.
there's that's him. And then finally, Bright Dance is just dishonest because she'll use the dictionary definition of something or set a position that she's come to by herself and say that that's a position that a person, let's say a theist or somebody who isn't a atheist, has to hold in order to be not an atheist. And I find that instead of letting people determine their own position, which is the right and honest thing to do, she doesn't do that.
Hmm.
Okay, so
Interesting. So, of the people that are, so we went over the people that you like over in the theism world and the atheism world, and the people that you love to hate in the atheism world. Who do you love to hate in the theism world?
um, I'm going to talk about YouTubers. I will talk about people in general because I can do
We're just
both.
talking about the YouTube universe, like the people that put themselves out there as, essentially proselytizers of a specific opinion,
Okay,
or
uh,
promoters of a specific opinion.
okay. Weird the Master, Ray Comfort.
Okay.
Uh,
So the whole
Verified
evolution
Gets.
versus God DVD
You're going
thing.
to see a pattern emerging a bit. Uh, who else do I really not like? What's his name? Nephilim Free. Um, uh, PP Simmons.
Hmm.
Um, the True Squad. Those. Those sort of people. Sort of like the crazy creationist types.
Okay. So, do you find that the crazy creationist types, as you call them, make it more difficult for people like you who are who consider yourself a Christian to engage in rational, respectful discussion with other people?
Well, yeah, but I think that's true for both sides, though. I
Okay.
would say, because I mean, do you not find it difficult when people come to you and they've got a pre understanding of the position you actually hold, and that's nothing like the position you actually do hold. So
I
it,
think that's a really good point. That's a really good. Now, I happen to live in America. I live in the Northeast Corridor, which is very liberal. So I happen to live in an area where if I walked around without my shirt on, with a red A painted on my chest representing atheism, I would probably get a lot more high fives walking down the streets of the city than I would get looks of, disapproval. But that just happens to be the environment that I live in. But I can see how even in the state that I live in, if I were to go 4 hours in a certain direction and make the statements that I make in my comfort zone of the city, I would no longer be in that comfort zone, and people would look at me like I was Satan's spawn just because I'm an atheist. And I think that it is because I think that a little bit of it has to do with the media too. I think that the media, when they represent a theological position, they seem to get somebody who is fringe on one side and fringe on the other side, and that's who people have in their mind as what a Christian is and what an atheist is. And I think it freaks people out.
absolutely, because I mean, look, because again, it's not necessarily the crazy creationist. It's to get the low blabbermouths, because
Hmm.
again, moderates. And again, I consider myself a moderate. Or hopefully, you consider yourself a moderate. We
Hmm.
tend to be the quiet ones who don't really want to create a fuss, whereas the loud, obnoxious ones, they're the ones that get the most press and the most attention. So therefore, they're what people think of when they say, what do you think of as a Christian? They'll probably say it's a, I don't know. I'm trying to think someone who's very popular Christian out there, like I don't know, Benny Hinn or something like that.
Sure. Benny Hinn or
I'm
Pat
going to get a
Robertson
popularity
or
out there. It's going to be like someone like, I don't know, Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins. Now, I suppose that you may cross over with some of their views, but they don't represent every one of your particular views when it comes to particular topics.
hmm. Yeah, but I do place a little bit more of the blame on media because they're giving people what they want instead of what they need, in the sense that people prefer to see the more extreme sides of things in the hopes that there's a clash. But admittedly, I've seen a bunch of shows on YouTube that are broadcast from the BBC that seem to address the more moderate approach. That's things that's something you don't see in America. You don't see like hour-long broadcasts with no commercial interruptions on a very serious topic with four people representing each side as a panel and a moderate, logical, respectful civil discussion format. Whereas it seems like in the UK, the BBC has shows like that all the time. Maybe it's just
Yeah,
the grass is always greener.
well, the BBC it tends to do things more respectfully, whereas like we look at CNN or NBC or Fox, they're interested in the amount of views they
Alarmist.
get, the amount of advertising revenue they can sell, and not in necessarily presenting a fair and balanced argument. Based, again, you're not going to see a discussion on an American news show between somebody like I don't know Alberto Echo and you know NT Wright. You're just not going to see things like that because those two people are intellectual, and that's not what creates views. Intellectualism doesn't create views. somebody who says, "Oh, you're an idiot. You're going to hell." The sort of what's it called? What I
Yeah,
like to call interview wrestling.
yeah.
Interview boxing. The sort of combat thing. That's what people tend to tune in for.
It's almost like in America, the broadcast networks are waiting for moments that can be chopped up into little YouTube clips and rebroadcast as memes.
Yeah, I mean, because that's what people do. I mean, like, cause even whether they agree or disagree, you'll usually see like one side or the other like posting. I don't know, David Silver gets owned by Bill O'Reilly, or Bill O'Reilly gets owned by Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins gets owned by Bill O'Reilly. It's just
Oh
such
yeah,
nonsense. It's just like,
and
well, hang on a second. It's not about owning somebody
I
or
know, and
or,
the
or,
language
or
gets even
winning.
worse and
It's,
worse
it's it's
depending
about a
on what
discussion.
media format you go to. So if you read the Huffington Post, people get eviscerated all the time and owned and pawned, and yeah, it's a very alarmist way we have here in America, I have to admit. But I'm going to pivot off of that real quick, and I'm going to start asking you a bunch of questions that I have set up here. They're a little bit structured in a similar sense as my introductory questions were, but these are ones that I did not give you in advance. So I'm hoping that they are thought-provoking for you. My first one is just to give you a sense of, or just to give us a sense of where you are in the atheist, theist world. Would the world be better off without atheists, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so.
Why?
No, because it's always good to have discussion and argument on any subject.
Okay. Um, and here's a question that I always preface by saying this can be a little confrontational. I don't mean it as such, but please try to answer it as honestly as you can. What evidence would disprove your worldview?
Um, if people could prove to me that God doesn't uh, suit the evidence that we have, I would tend to dismiss it.
Okay, so you really are moderate in the sense that you really are striving towards objectivity, where your conclusions are so based on evidence that you receive that if the evidence changes, you will change your belief.
Yes.
Okay, that's refreshing. That's great to hear, man. Um, Here's a question. What question would you most want to be asked by an atheist?
Um, I think the question I'd most like to be asked by an atheist is, you know, what other things are you interested in apart from religion? You're trying to get to know me as a person.
Cool. And so what would the answer to that question be?
I like films. I like reading books. I like Shakespeare. I like gaming. I'm a huge gamer. I'm a huge, comic book nerd. I'm a huge, tabletop gaming nerd. You know,
Excellent. Cool. Great answer. And what question would you least want to be asked by an atheist?
why do I believe in a magical sky daddy or a magical Jewish
Ah,
zombie?
okay, cool. Um, what else? Here's a question for you. Let's say you got to pick the smartest or wisest person that you can come up with as a representative of humanity to answer this simple question. Does God exist? What field of study should that person be known for, and why?
Does God exist?
Yeah. So if you got to choose somebody out of all of humanity that is alive now, I want to try to contain this. Of the people that are alive now in humanity, who would you choose to answer the question, does God exist? And what field of study should that person be known for, and why?
I'd probably choose N.T. Wright because he's a
Okay.
biblical scholar, but he's also, ex-bishop of Durham and does a little bit of theology and stuff like that. So I'd probably choose him.
Okay. And why
Well,
do you think that
actually,
his
no,
credentials
I'd
are
change
better
that.
than
I'd
anyone
have him
else's?
and I'd have Michio Kaku.
Say that
Because
one more
he's an
time, please.
astrophysicist, so he can deal with the science side.
Say that one more time.
Michio Kaku.
Okay. So why would you choose them? What is it about their credentials that place them above the other choices available?
N.T. Wright is very respected as a New Testament scholar. He's written more books than we probably have hot dinners. He's somebody that is very respected in the community he's in. Same with Michio Kaku. If you read his works on, you know, um, physics and the theory of the multiverse theory, string theory, and stuff like that, it's really interesting. Even though I don't understand it, it's quite interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm right there with you. I enjoy reading it because it's entertaining and it's good thought experiments. But I can't say that I've completely wrapped my head around all of the theoretical physics that I read. Um, and here's a question. I think that you had brought this up in one of our precursory chats. But do you feel that babies are born theists or atheists?
Do I think babies are born atheists or theists? I think
Yes.
they're born neither. I think they're born. I think they're born without views about anything.
Okay. Okay.
And I think that to argue that atheist is the default, I think is a bit odd because you can't objectively know what a baby is thinking or what its perception of the world is. And I think saying that babies are atheists is basically demeaning atheism because surely atheism is based upon your intellectual knowledge of a premise as it's presented to you, not based upon ignorance of that subject.
Okay. So if I can paraphrase, because that's a interesting topic, so I'd like to pursue that just for a second. So you're saying that because this is something that people actually use as an argument. Um, that babies are born atheists, and of course it is an argument used by some atheists, and you're saying that's an insult to atheists because it is a position of ignorance as compared to an empowering position of knowledge, right? Instead of coming to the conclusion that you're an atheist based on positive things that you do know and understand, the way that question is phrased puts it as atheism is a conclusion you come to out of ignorance.
Yeah, because I think that I'd hope so, that most atheists consider themselves intellectual or consider
Hmm.
themselves knowledgeable, at least in a couple of fields, and therefore what you're doing is you're demeaning yourself by saying, well, babies are atheists. Well, how do you know what a baby is? Again, and even if that's true, then what you're trying to say is that you're a baby. Is that basically your argument to me? Are you saying that you're not? Again, I think that most atheists would find that insulting.
Hmm.
The other day, I told that most atheists think of themselves as free thinking, rational people, just as like the rest of humanity does. So saying, "Oh well, it's a baby thing," is just odd to me.
Hmm. Okay, that was a good explanation. So I have one final question, and this was also brought up in one of our precursory discussions. Do you feel that theism or faith in God is a mental illness?
No, not really. But I think religious people can be mentally ill, but I don't think there's any
Hmm.
crossover. I don't think
All
that's the
right.
reason
I
they are
actually
mentally
I
ill.
have a better question. This is a fairer way of framing the same question. What do
Okay.
you think of the argument that people who have faith and are theists have a mental illness?
I think it's a rubbish argument because you're trying to use a smear that we have against mental illness as an attack on a group you disagree with.
Hmm.
Here's the way that I'd put it to anybody who uses that argument. Imagine somebody said that about a group that a thing that you happen to be. Let's say, for example, someone said, "Well, you're mentally ill because you're white, or you're mentally ill because you wear glasses, or you're mentally ill because you're wearing a shirt, or you're mentally ill because you're right-handed." And it's just such a nonsense.
Or
It's an arbitrary thing.
you're
Mental illness
mentally
doesn't
ill
work that way.
because you're different from me.
Exactly. That's what it says. It's because I don't understand why you believe what you believe, so therefore you must be crazy. I find that as the most insulting thing ever.
And yet, I mean, the reason why I bring it up is because it's an argument that's out there, and I think that it's an absurd enough argument that I want to get people's temperature on how they feel about it. I'm gonna be asking the same question to the theists that come on the show, the atheists that come on the show, because I'm super curious where this line of reasoning comes from. I think that somebody on the Cult of Honesty Facebook page said something to the effect of trying to equivocate belief in God or revelation with schizophrenia, and which is a version of this argument. And I just had to, as an atheist, I had to kind of squash that and say that that's a bit of an absurd comment, just because just claiming that somebody's having a break from reality because they believe something different from you is the most childish and knee-jerk reaction I can think of, when there are so many different avenues to have a great discussion on that topic.
I absolutely agree. I'd also say that is that you're demeaning people with actual legitimate mental illnesses as well. I mean, because there's people who have to go through, not just, it's not like a regular illness. Well, it's as bad as a regular illness, but it's even more because it's all in your mind. So, like, any fear, any pain, any traumatic experiences you feel are more visceral because they're in your head. So, like, any, this is schizophrenia is something where if something happens, you become totally afraid of it. And that's just totally insulting to people with actual legitimate illnesses. As I said, it's like saying, somebody, you've got cancer. It's just like, what?
Yeah, it's a poorly thought out argument, and fortunately, the person who laid that argument out, when I expressed some disappointment in the way that argument was used, the person who used the argument was super nice and retracted the comment, and so that the outcome of that particular event was very nice, but I kind of feel responsible to say something to people who try to make that equivocation. But on that point, I think we're just about our time is up for today. So let me start wrapping up the show by first thanking you, Gary, for taking the time out of your day. I know it's a little bit later in the evening for you over there in the UK than it is for us over here in the States.
Yep, it's no problem.
Mm-hmm. And I hope that we are able to maintain this dialogue. I hope that you can feel free to get in touch with me about any future questions you have. I would like to think that, we've started a good enough conversation that we can continue. I think that there's plenty of other things that you and I could discuss, so I would like to hold open an open invitation to be on the show in the future if you so choose to do so.
Absolutely.
Okay. And as I mentioned last week, after I'm done with this particular episode, I'm going to record a post-show little vlog thing on my YouTube channel. So for anyone who is watching this, who goes to YouTube and watches things like that, you can go to youtube.com/user/Mauteman, MAUTEMAN. That is my YouTube channel. That's where you can see last week's episode, future episodes, snippets of episodes, promos for the show, as well as post-show wrap-ups. And so I think that that's pretty much it. Gary, thank you again very much. And that is the end of this week's Meeting of the Minds. You'll be seeing me 2 more times today. I'm going to be filling in for Greg Bray. I'm going to be kicking up the dirt a little bit with Joey Livingston on Clash Course. And I'm also going to be hosting Inspiring Honesty. So I will see everybody a little bit later today. Thank you very much and have a great day.